and welcome to another episode of the Future Dreamers podcast by Starlie. I'm Kathryn. I created this crazy astrology software application that works on your computer and your phone called Starlie. It's in beta testing currently, and you are free to download it anytime at starlie.com. But what are we going to talk about on this episode? So I spent so much time this summer just diving in to so many cool books and just really let myself have like a summer of reading and learning and going deep into some stuff. And, if you are a fan of astrology, then what is astrology made of? Well, apart from being tied to the stars, the planets, the cosmos, and just generally being a guidance system of the deep, many layered seasons of our lives and just the general course of the universe, you've kind of got a few key ingredients of like the facets of astrology that help put the entire system together. You've got the planets. Most people are familiar with those. You've got the zodiac system. That's kind of the most famous thing about astrology. Then you have the dial, the wheel of the dial of the houses. And then you have aspects. And then you kind of put it all to time, and then you have transits. But what I wanted to talk about in this episode is something that I've gotten way deeper into in the last 6 months than I think I ever have in my astrological studies, which is the dial of the houses and how they really form essentially a system of human development that is meant to extract and hone our creative abilities so that we can be creators from the unique spark of who we are versus like what the society or family we grew up in might want us to be. And so I wanted to spend this episode, hopefully I can do this in under 15 minutes, to kind of explain how the dial of the houses gives us a framework for human development that I think is really revolutionary when you understand it, because most importantly, it helps you understand the path of development you've undertaken, you've gone on in your own life, but then it can help you make sense of anyone in your life around you, where they may be in their own path of development. And certainly you can extrapolate that, further out into the rest of the world. But so let's get into just like kind of breaking down each house and get a sense for what we can glean from the highest perspective of each house. Talk a little bit about, what happens if you don't fully juice the potential that's available to us to learn in each house, and how they all stack together, because it is, a wheel that, I think in traditional, regular, degular Instagram astrology, people talk about the wheel of the dial of the houses as like they're just different areas of your life. The second house is career, finance, and money, or just inheritance, or things revolving material possessions, or the 11th house is friends and group settings. I think you can go a lot deeper into this system in a way that actually gives us something to do with it that is really beautiful and tangible, which is figure out how we fully develop our consciousness. And so let's just get into it from house one. So an interesting thing to note, and this is a very Dane Rudyard kind of way of looking at things, but if you look at the horizon and just like draw a circle or draw a straight line through the dial of the houses, houses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 would be below the horizon, kind of constituting everything that's below the surface, our inner world. And then houses 7 through 12 that are on the top side of the circle, if you're listening to this in your car or not watching on video, but I'm just kind of explaining it with my fingers. So that 7 through 12 are the houses that are above the surface. So in the things where everything can change in your environment, from a bird flying around to getting hit by a gust of wind. It's where things are never static, versus below the horizon is really, it's not to say that it's static because you can always improve yourself, but it is really the core of your interior. the core of your individuality that really behooves you to ground and understand so that you can function at your best in the world above the horizon where everything's moving. It's all about relationships, changing us and us changing others through being in relationship. So the first house is the unique impulse of who we truly are. What sets us apart from everybody else? If you were to think of it as a seed, if you are into gardening, you can plant a pack of seeds, and each one of those plants it might be the same plant, but it's not going to turn out. It's called a phenotype if you're into like biology and gardening and whatnot. So you could plant the same cultivar, which is like a species of plant, but you could plant a row of 6, 7, 10, and each one is just going to have slightly different characteristics. And so to look at the planets that you have in your first house and really contemplate, and your ascendant is always in your first house, and your first house is determined by where the horizon is, what zodiac sign the horizon is in when you're born, at the first moment you take your breath. And so to really contemplate what's in that house, characterized by the zodiac sign that fits in that house cusp, and say, this is my unique impulse. There is some interesting stuff here that I need to just mull on, chew on, and really understand the archetypes of the planets in the zodiac they're in, and how, if there are multiple planets, how they play together. And I think that's why it's so important that we all begin, anyone who's interested in astrology, begin to understand our own astrology for ourselves, because that's when it really becomes powerful. It's amazing to get a birth chart reading from a practice astrologer. I think it's such a cool form of self-care. But I think where Earth really wants us to go is in the direction of truly knowing ourselves. And so that first house is where we get that initial sort of idea that like there is something about me that just nobody else can bring to the world. And if I cultivate myself throughout the rest of the 12 houses, that is how I'm going to bring that best of my uniqueness to my own world, the world of my community, and truly to the whole collective. Because it's about this journey of becoming an individual, a true individuated human organism, then contributing your individuality to your group, your family, your tribal scenario, and the collective as a whole, really. Because true individuals, if they really go for it in their lives, have the ability to contribute and change the collective. And then the dream goal is contributing cosmically. Like, okay, maybe we're not there yet as a species, but I think we need to have our eye on cosmic consciousness and cosmic contribution. Even if we don't get there in our lifetimes, like us beginning to figure that out now makes it easier for the generations that are coming. Okay, so house 1, that is our individual uniqueness. And praise be that everybody gets to experience being their unique selves in this lifetime. But as we get into house 2, a lot of people talk about it as if like it's just a material, situation of like money, inheritance, and whatnot. But I think if you go to the deeper level, what it really means is your second house is about everything you've inherited in your total environment, your family situation, your schools, your communities, the nation you were born in. And whether you inherit any money from your family or the opposite is really kind of the situation you were born into, that is sort of the soil in which your unique spark kind of has to begin to be planted. And, when we're young, we're not very conscious of being able, like, we certainly can't choose the families we're born into. And we just kind of absorb unconsciously everything that comes into our world through our environments. And so as we mature, we are going to be called to kind of sort out for ourselves what is true given our unique spark that we learned about in the first house versus what we just kind of absorbed by being alive in our environments. And some of it we're going to want to really take with us maybe. And maybe there are going to be things that we have to definitely sort out that do not match our uniqueness And it was kind of an anti-lesson for us. We learned what we don't want to be by experiencing our environments. And so we really kind of get to the crux of that synthesis in the third house, which I think in general astrology or like surface level astrology is about communication, but or group communication. But what I think the true invitation for us in the third house in terms of human development is where we look at what we our unique spark that's in our first house and the environment we grew up in our second house, and now we start to synthesize those two things together. And if we can individuate, at the highest level, we are not letting our environments overtake the growth of our seed. Certainly we use whatever we could in our environments to grow, but we have to grow, we may have to grow out of it and separate ourselves from it. And in the third house, that's where we truly synthesize what that situation is for us. So it's interesting as you get to the third house is at the bottom of the first quadrant, and it's a house of synthesis. Then when you get to the sixth house, the ninth house, the 12th house, the kind of like matching houses on those angles, they all have this vibe of synthesis in them. And I think that's a good metaphor for what astrology is truly about, is to synthesize your uniqueness, because we all have different facets, but if we can learn to tune them and use them all together, that is like the magical juice right there. Okay, so moving from the third house to the fourth house. This is the house of, they call it the house of family and home, but what really is your home other than you as an individual? Like, thinking of like the zodiac sign of Cancer, the home of your individuality. And it's also the sign, the house that is at the bottom of the meridian, like the line that goes up and down in the dial of houses. I'm getting a little tripped up on words here, so forgive. But so in the fourth house, we have this opportunity to shoot our roots down into the ground that is going to stabilize us as we become activated in all other facets of creativity as we move through the rest of the dial of the houses. So I think of the fourth house, yes, it's home and family, but it's how do I ground my unique individuality that I've been understanding in the first house, using everything in my environment in the second house to grow and to use all of those resources to live and to continue growing, and then that you synthesized in the third house. So the fourth house is really where you lock all of that in, because it's going to ground you for everything else you ever do. And it's where you start to gain a true sense of like who you really are. And then what do you do with that true sense of who you really are? Well, you shoot it out into the universe in the fifth house, which they call a house of creativity. An interesting distinction, there's multiple places within the dial of the houses where creativity comes into play, but this is really creativity that is reflective of who you are as an individual. It's not really partnership creativity. It's like you just have to get some stamp and mark of your individuality out into the world, whether that is through singing, through painting, whether that is through a passionate love affair. Maybe you could call the fifth house the house of fuck boys and fuck girls. Are there fuck girls? Anyway, like maybe kind of like the house of one night stands at the shadow level. Not that there is anything wrong with one night stands. I fully support them if that's right for you in whatever season of your life you're in. But you get the point. It is individual creativity kind of just like bursting forth out of you. Almost like very Leo vibes. Like you've just got to be you and you've got to do it in the world in front of other people. And so yeah, like basically a very fun house. And so that brings us to the sixth house, which is right at the top of the dial that is under the horizon before we move into the seventh house, which impels us to enter relationship above the horizon in basically above the surface, where relationship is the manner through which we evolve and others evolve us. So before we get there, we have to really like almost Virgo vibes, where after Leo has gone out and just like been its most J-Lo self, it may have to like take stock of who it is. It's almost like a last chance opportunity to revamp parts of you that might not be ready for prime time. I think Dane Rudyard calls it the house of crisis. It's funny because I'm having a Uranus in Taurus conjunct my Chiron retrograde in Taurus in the 6th house. I'm having a year and a half of that. So I'm certainly doing a lot of inner soul searching and saying, what do I need to ferret out that is old patterns and really lock in about my true individuality, that I have sunk roots into the depths of the earth in order to stabilize being my true self, that has the discernment to not be swayed by others' opinions of me, and what society says it wants for its own goals and needs versus like what I truly must do to become a creative individual that is based on my unique spark. And so the 6th house is really that stage of sort of revamping that could come through discomfort and crisis, but is so beneficial because if you really do that for all it's worth, then as you move into the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th through 12th houses, you know that however you get knocked around by the world, you're going to move through the world as your true, tried and tested self. I think that's really the beauty of what the 6th house can avail to us in our life. So as you go through your own houses, start to think about what the purpose of creative development each of these houses has to offer you and what planets you have in them and the zodiac sign, costumes they are wearing. And if you don't have any planets in any of these signs, it doesn't mean that you don't get to like play and get the most out of that house. What it means is you might just not have like that house might just be a natural house where you cruise through and excel, and you don't have a lot of like shake up and drama going on in that house. Like I have Chiron in Taurus and Chiron retrograde in Taurus in the 6th house. So I am facing all my fears of self-worth, with this Uranus and Taurus energy. It's very internal because Uranus is retrograde right now and my natal Chiron is retrograde. So I am just, as I move forward in this business that I'm trying to create, which is really based on service, I am just going through major cycles of inner development that are meant to propel me into, if I can withstand the change that I'm undergoing, like grounded progress in the outer world. So, not to get too biographical, but sometimes it's easy to give personal examples. So, 6th house, that's where we like really get real with ourselves and fix whatever bolts and nuts weren't screwed on right before we move into the 7th house, which is all about change through relationships. Ooh, like the kind of relationships that get so deep because if you're moving into this house at its highest capacity, then you are a true individuated individual who's gardened yourself to the best of your ability at whatever phase you are in life. And you are entering into relationship with somebody who has done the same, an equal level partner. Because when two equals who are like really down to like do it in this lifetime meet, the level of metamorphosis available to you in that lifetime is like frankly wild. And it truly is like a new level of change. You're not just internally gardening yourself. Like when you're in a marriage, when you're truly sharing everything in your life, you kind of have this realization like, whoa, this person could like wreck my life. That's a bit scary. And so there's a lot of surrender that comes with like being in true metamorphic partnership. And that's all what the 7th house is about. And this could be more than just love relationships. I know in regular astrology, they often call the 7th house the house of love and marriage. And yes, it is that, but partnership can be more than that. It can be business. And so just whatever you have to enter into with some level of deep surrender, and you know that you are going to evolve that situation, and that situation is going to evolve you, and it can be very unpredictable. And so then when we get to the 8th house, we start to use our creative abilities to make change in the world through groups. And this is like small partnerships. Maybe you start a business with a couple of people. Maybe you take a leadership role in a small group in your community. Maybe you start to move into a creative role where you are communicating with large groups of people. And there's a whole nother curriculum of lessons that you will no doubt move into as you step out of the seventh house, which, all of these things can be concurrent. It's not like a linear thing. This is very right brain, non-linear, gestalt, holistic stuff. And so, just the level of lessons when you bring more personalities to the table, amplifies exponentially. So then what do we do with all of this? As we move into the ninth house, it's kind of like the third house where we synthesize the first and second house. But now in the ninth house, we are synthesizing all of the metamorphic lessons that we learned through individual partnership in the seventh house and partnership in groups in the eighth house, and like making it make sense. And it's not just that we can make it, we have to learn how to synthesize and truly glean the deep lessons that we've learned through relationship in our own lives, but this gives us the ability to extrapolate the lessons we've learned and understand that everyone in the world is kind of going through the same process simultaneously in all kinds of ways, because different kaleidoscopes of people are bumping up in front of each other all the time. This little painting thing I have here, canvas, if you are watching on video, is an image I created in Mid-Journey of the monad, the individual unit of consciousness that represents each of us as individuals, down to the level of the cell, down to up to the level of galaxies and beyond. But so, as monads, kind of like that term, being like an individual unit of consciousness, that's what we all are as humans. And so we are just kind of like monads bumping up against monads, teaching each other different lessons, and just everything metamorphosizes like a kaleidoscope as that interaction occurs. And so that's really the name of the game for all of the houses above the horizon from 7 to 12. But the ninth house is where you really deeply understand how to glean lessons from what is learned through relationship. And that is what truly sets you up if to check ourselves. If in the first house we've clearly identified our unique spark, and in the second house we've taken everything we could from our environment, good or bad, and used it, put it to purpose to further our unique impulse in this life, synthesized that in the third, locked in our individuality in the fourth, created for all we could in the fifth house, revamped and tweaked and torqued ourselves in the sixth house, gotten into relationship in the seventh house and knocked around and loved other people, done it in groups in the eighth house and figured out what it was all for in the ninth house. In the 10th house is where we can truly lock in our abundance in the realm of career. That is the top of the meridian that is linked to your fourth house, which is your roots. So if you have really strong roots, you are really well prepared and set up to thrive in your 10th house of career. And you've learned how to interact in relationships and integrate the lessons so that you really are a defined, individuated human being who has a well of discernment at your disposal. And where I think this gets really fun is the 11th house. So the 11th house is directly like across from the 5th house, which, if you remember, is the house of like just doing your own creativity, like really just you being you and shooting your shot out into the world. But when you've gotten to the point that you are in the 11th house of the collective, which in regular astrology, they call the house of friends and groups. But I think that it is so much more meaningful if you take it to mean, how do you contribute in a creative way to the collective? And if you've really locked in your 10th house, you have the resources to do that. So it's really cool to see people who are actually using their abundance and wealth to do collective contribution through their uniqueness at the highest level. not all rich people are doing that. But I mean, the ones that are, and you don't have to be rich, you just have to like have yourself locked in. And I think that there's such an opportunity for creative, like pure glory in a positive way that's not, where anybody has to lose. It's not a zero-sum game. It's really, I would, if I had to like give a tagline to the 11th house, it would be creativity in the infinite game, because you know that whatever you contribute to the collective doesn't die when you die. Like you've really sent an infinite wave out into the metamorphic, ocean that we all exist in, and that will affect all the souls that haven't even been born yet. So that's one of my favorite houses. But and then we get to the 12th house. They call it the house of the subconscious and the subterranean world. But I think that the interesting part about the 12th house is it's almost like where the seed forms. The plant might be dying, and it's not time based and linear where it's like it has to be, you figure this out when you're 90, but it's where you start to make sense out of everything that's ever happened to you in your life. And so it does have that like Piscean energy. And so, I just wanted to like go through the wheel of the house or the dial of the houses as quickly as I could. And I don't know if I actually did this quickly or not, but I hope that helps you understand that what it offers us in terms of this framework of houses is really a model of human development that is meant to unfold our ability to become truly creative individuals in this life. And what could be more exciting than that? So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Starlight Future Dreamers podcast. And I look forward to talking about many, many more astrology topics with you soon. So toodles, and thanks for listening.